In the suburbs inside a crowded metro, people were glued to the live telecast of the MMA World Championship. The host's booming voice filled the air as he declared that tonight marked the champion's 17th title defense. The atmosphere was electric. Inside the stadium, the crowd erupted with cheers and anticipation. The announcer first introduced the challenger, Patrick, a tall, ripped fighter who threw off his robe and stepped confidently into the arena. Then came the roar for the champion. The announcer's voice echoed, 37 fights, 37 wins, every single one by knockout. The undefeated world champion, Kim Jin-ho. Unlike his bulky rival, Jin-ho carried a lean but sharp frame. He tossed aside his robe and entered the ring, his calm presence radiating intimidation. The referees signaled for the fight to begin, and the two men faced off. From the commentator's booth, discussion began. One voice wondered how the fight would unfold. The other replied that Patrick had speculated in an interview about Jin-ho's possible leg injury, since the champion had avoided using footwork in recent matches. Patrick, he explained, would likely exploit that weakness. The first commentator added that Jin-ho, now over 40, might finally be dethroned tonight if the injury were real. Both fighters took their stance. Patrick, nervous but determined, locked eyes with Jin-ho. He thought to himself that the champion's presence was overwhelming. But if he could just take that leg, victory would be his. Charging forward, Patrick focused entirely on the supposed weakness. With a grin, he thought how arrogant it was of Jin-ho to step into the ring with such a flaw. He swore he'd destroy that leg forever. As his hand closed in to grab Jin-ho's leg, Patrick felt victory within reach. But in the very next instant, a burst of blood filled the air alongside a flying mouthguard. The commentator's voice cracked with disbelief. Kim Jin-ho's flawless spinning kick had landed. Patrick was sent crashing down, unconscious in a single strike. His nose gushed blood as he lay motionless. The referee immediately announced the result. The commentators shouted that Patrick could not get back up. It was a shocking first-round knockout. Jin-ho stood over his fallen opponent and coldly muttered that this was the reason he never used his legs. Later in the locker room, Jin-ho's coach tried to stop him. He reminded him about the press conference, urging that he couldn't skip it this time, not after such a fight. But Jin-ho, pulling on his hoodie, dismissed him and told him to handle it himself. The coach protested, frustrated, but Jin-ho simply thanked him and said to call when the next match was scheduled. The coach sighed, defeated, and told him to at least take the car, since the weather outside was unbearable. But Jin-ho replied casually that with the heavy traffic, he'd rather run home. The coach's eyes widened in shock as Jin-ho walked out. He shouted after him, reminding him that it was 30 kilometers to his house. But before he could pursue, the media swarmed in, bombarding him with questions about Jin-ho, about the injury rumors, about the match. Exhausted, the coach could only sigh. Meanwhile, Jin-ho was already sprinting through heavy rain. Memories of his career flashed through his mind, his debut knockout, his streak of victories, and the countless headlines that had crowned him a legend. He remembered the words of someone who once told him that until the day he retired, no opponent would ever bring him joy again. Eventually, he arrived at his towering skyscraper home, 34 floors high. After bathing, he sat before his computer, a grin forming. He booted up Last Savior, an infamously difficult game that even hardcore Korean gamers had long abandoned. But for the past 10 years, Jin-ho had played it religiously, seeking challenges that reality no longer offered. In this game, he could still feel the thrill of the chase, the feeling of being a challenger. Facing the screen, he muttered that the final boss, Demon King Izar, wouldn't be defeated today either. His character stood before the monstrous enemy. Outside, thunder and rain raged as Jin-ho fought intensely, his character chipping away at the Demon King's health bar. But soon he realized something was strange. The patterns were too simple, his hits too precise. His character's blade glowed with violent blue energy, forming the image of a ferocious lion as it slashed mercilessly through the Demon King. Jin-ho reflected bitterly. What began as a challenge to win had twisted into fear of victory itself. With dazzling control, he executed the final strike. A message appeared. Congratulations, Demon King Izar was defeated. The game ended. Last Savior. Thank you for playing. Kim Jin-ho had become a champion of two worlds. But instead of elation, frustration consumed him. He hurled his mouse, cracking the monitor, and muttered angrily, Who was left to fight now? Even the thought of challenging a bear crossed his mind. He cursed in despair. Just then, lightning crashed outside his window. A thunderclap shook his room, and in the next instant, a blinding strike hit. Jinho blacked out. Half conscious, he began to hear voices. Someone was calling him. "Hey, 218! He blinked awake, finding himself in the rain, utterly disoriented. He thought to himself, when did he even leave? A boy suddenly grabbed his shoulder, shouting for him to move. He wore a jacket with the number 172. Urgently, he told Jinho they had no time, that they had to escape now. Bewildered, Jinho asked who he was and where this place was. Around them, countless people were running toward a massive gate, rain pouring over all of them. Jinho caught sight of a strange flag above the gate, something vaguely familiar. The boy shook him again, shouting desperately. Did he want to rot here forever? This was their last chance, their final escape from Carrion. Still reeling, Jinho's eyes widened as he realized what he said. Carrion! He couldn't believe it. And as he stood amidst the chaos, the shock in his eyes grew even sharper. The boy grabbed Jinho's collar and shouted that there was no time to dawdle, urging him to move immediately. Still stunned by the scene before him, Jinho wondered if what he was seeing was even possible. A massive crowd of people was running desperately toward the gate, and he found himself lying right in the middle of it. They were prisoners, all of them. Ropes were tied around the massive gate as prisoners pulled in rows, shouting to each other to pull just a little more. Jinho's thoughts raced. No, this sensation was too real. There was no way this was a dream. Could it be that he had somehow entered the game he was playing? As a prisoner, no less? The boy tugged at his arm, trying to drag him faster, but Jinho could only think that everything was a mystery. Still, survival came first. He had to get out of there. Suddenly, Jinho stopped. The boy whipped around, furious, calling him a lunatic for wasting time, but Jinho cut him off. Something about this seemed strange. Looking around at the chaos, the prisoners fighting guards, the frantic attempts to push open the gate, he realized something was off. If this really was Carrion, then it shouldn't be happening this way. It was far too careless. The boy quickly explained that it was because Director Clark wasn't there. Jinho asked who this Director Clark was, and the boy, still dragging him, replied that the director had rushed out earlier, which was why now was their chance. But suddenly Jinho grabbed the boy's collar and began pulling him backward. The boy screamed in frustration, demanding to know what he was doing, but Jinho ignored him, dragging him away from the gate. His instincts as a fighter screamed at him, no matter what, he should not step beyond that door. The boy struggled to break free, shouting at him to let go. Meanwhile, cheers erupted as the prisoners managed to crack open the gate. They screamed in joy that they were free at last. But the moment they rushed through, blood splattered and a severed hand flew into the air. Standing at the gate was none other than Director Clark. A sword gleamed in his hand, and behind him stood countless guards armed with blades. In front of him lay a man on the ground, writhing in pain, his hand freshly severed. With a cruel smile, Director Clark mocked them as pathetic worms. He then roared for the guards to kill them all. The boy, still in Jinho's grip, whispered Clark's name in dread, but Jinho snapped back that it was obvious now. This was a trap. He urged him to shut up and run. What followed was a massacre. Guards stormed through the gate, cutting down prisoners without mercy. Screams filled the air as men and women who had been celebrating their freedom moments ago were slaughtered. The walls and gates were painted red with blood. When it was over, Director Clark ordered the remaining prisoners rounded up. The guards obeyed instantly, forcing them into lines. Before them lay the corpses of those who had attempted to escape, hacked and butchered. The boy gagged at the grotesque sight, unable to hold back his disgust, and vomited. One guard noticed him, sneered, and reminded him he had been told not to move. Grabbing the boy by the hair, the guard kicked him hard in the stomach. He barked to everyone that anyone who moved from now on would be cut down on the spot. Watching this, Jinho thought grimly about how ruthless they were, even towards children. At this rate, another massacre could break out any moment, and if it did, he might have no choice but to fight. Just then, Director Clark, towering and intimidating, walked right up to Jinho. He mocked him, suggesting that maybe he had survived out of cowardice rather than luck. Addressing all the prisoners, Clark sneered that mages were nothing but cowards, and calling them rivals was an insult. Leaning in close, he glared at Jinho and said that he would regret surviving today, Arahan. As Clark walked away, he added that he would be looking forward to it. Jinho glanced down at a puddle on the ground, his reflection staring back at him. Did he just say Arahan? His eyes widened in shock. Days later, Jinho found himself at the labor camp, where life had only one routine: stacking stone towers. A meaningless task designed to crush the prisoners physically and mentally. Drenched in sweat, Jinho panted heavily, realizing how fragile this body was. Just lifting a single stone left him breathless. Judging from his appearance, he was about 15. And one more thing, this body belonged to a mage. Yet when he had tried casting magic in secret at night, he failed. The Arahan family, known as one of the greatest mage lineages, was famous for their crimson eyes. For an Arahan to be incapable of magic, that was unsettling. Jinho wondered if that was why this body had been discarded in prison. Given what he knew of the Arahan family, it wouldn't surprise him. A guard shouted at him to move the stone tower to the other side, sitting lazily on a chair with a stick in hand. He demanded Jinho quit dawdling. Jinho, however, simply focused, wondering when this endless task would ever finish. In front of him, a glowing screen hovered. It read, "Synchronization in progress. Due to excessive data, synchronization is delayed. Progress 78%. Later, prisoners gathered for a meal. Each received a tiny piece of bread and bland soup." Looking down at the food, Jinho sighed. Maintaining his exercise routine was hard with rations like these. A yellow-haired boy approached him, calling him by his number, 218. He asked if Jinho wasn't eating his bread again. Without hesitation, Jinho handed his bread over, telling him to take it. The boy smiled and thanked him. Jinho thought to himself that while the other prisoners avoided him, this one was peculiar. The Arahan family's crimson eyes were feared as cursed, said to bring death to anyone who looked into them. Perhaps that was why everyone kept their distance. Yet this boy still stayed close. Watching him munch the bread, Jinho wondered why someone so young was locked away in Carian prison. The boy then warned him to be careful. Jinho asked what he meant, and the boy explained that because of his efforts, the workload had increased. Other prisoners weren't happy about it. Maybe he should take it easy. Jinho realized that explained the murderous stares he'd been getting lately. The boy nervously added that he should especially watch out for number 589, the leader of the prisoners. Once a notorious fighter in the arena, he was rumored to be in prison for murder. Jinho asked if that didn't mean being seen with him would put the boy in danger as well, but the boy only smiled, saying they'd known each other a while, and he couldn't just ignore him. Jinho stood up suddenly. Looking at the boy, he told him to move aside. The boy, confused, asked what he meant. At that moment, footsteps echoed closer. Jinho glanced to the side, confirming that the situation the boy feared was about to happen. The boy's face fell in dread. A group of men appeared, led by number 589. The gang leader shouted angrily, accusing Jinho of being the reason their workload had increased. Jinho coolly replied that he was only using it as light exercise. But before he could finish, a massive fist came crashing toward him. Jinho barely dodged in time, the ground cracking under the impact. Dust and smoke rose. The yellow-haired boy cried out, calling him number 218. As the smoke cleared, Jinho had already grabbed the gang leader by the collar, pulling him in close. He rammed his knee upward, kicking the leader square on the jaw. Everyone froze in shock. The boy, the gang members, all stunned that he had attacked their boss. But the gang leader only grinned. He hadn't even flinched. Jinho's eyes widened in disbelief. Was this body really so weak? The leader then seized Jinho by the collar, swinging him with brute strength and hurling him into the wall. He snarled that Jinho was marked for death now. As Jinho lay on the floor, a glowing screen appeared before his eyes. Synchronization progress 100%. Another window followed. Synchronization complete. Flat on the ground, Jinho smirked. Blue energy erupted from Jinho's body, coursing through his arms and legs as his muscles swelled with power. Dust swirled around him as the energy raged, shaking the floor. Taking a firm boxing stance, Jinho prepared for combat, a grin curling on his lips as he told the gang leader to get back inside. The leader scoffed, laughing mockingly. With a sneer, he clenched his fists and taunted, saying that for someone abandoned even by his own clan, Jinho was awfully full of himself. Jinho's grin didn't falter. In a calm but cutting tone, he told him to shut up and step in quickly, asking if he was scared. So, enraged, the gang leader shouted that he'd kill him just as he wished and lunged forward. Jinho responded instantly with a sharp sidekick, but the leader blocked it, seizing Jinho's foot. He grinned maliciously, muttering that this little rat would finally learn his place. But before he could finish, Jinho rotated his body and unleashed a devastating kick square into the side of the leader's head. The impact rattled him, forcing him to release his grip. Stumbling in disorientation, he couldn't recover before Jinho followed with another crushing kick to his jaw. The speed and force were astounding, sending blood spraying as his face twisted in pain. Jinho didn't stop there. Leaping into the air, he delivered a third brutal strike directly to the leader's face. The sheer power of the blow sent him crashing to the ground. Trembling, his bloodied and swollen face barely recognizable, the gang leader lay unconscious. Jinho glanced back at him and muttered coldly. This was exactly why he avoided using his legs. Furious at the sight, the surrounding gang members screamed, brandishing knives and shouting for Jinho's death. Jinho, unbothered, stepped on the fallen leader's body, twisted his arm behind him and gave a chilling ultimatum. If anyone dared come closer, he said, their leader would be begging for food for the rest of his life, and if they didn't like that, they could go fetch the warden. The members froze, baffled at his words. Jinho's voice hardened as he threatened further. If they didn't believe him, he would tear an arm off right then. Shocked, one of them panicked and ran off, yelling that he would bring the warden. The others gathered up their battered leader, muttering darkly that they wouldn't let him off next time. Watching them leave, Jinho thought to himself, that's exactly what he had to say. From the side, the boy watched in awe. His eyes gleamed with admiration as he asked how Jinho had learned to fight like that, marveling at his strength. Then, noticing Jinho properly, he hesitated and asked if he had always been that tall. He could have sworn Jinho was about his own height. Jinho replied casually, telling him to keep hoisting those stones. The boy frowned and muttered whether lifting rocks could really make someone taller. But Jinho wasn't listening anymore. His thoughts were racing. Synchronization, his real-life stats must have been transferred into this game-like body. Even so, it still felt underdeveloped compared to his real physique. What mattered now, however, was the actual stat screen. The screen appeared before him, displaying his information. His name, Zed Arahan. Class, Magician. A long list of traits appeared, including poison immunity, immortal duelist, and many others. But alongside them was a crushing penalty. His stats were heavily reduced due to stunted growth. 50 points were deducted from his base 100 in strength, agility, and endurance. His eyes narrowed as he scanned further. Something was wrong. Mana, 0. His mind reeled. Arahan, a magician, yet with no mana at all. How could they give him such pathetic stats and then transfer his consciousness into this body? Lying down on his bed, Jinho cursed the situation. This character was garbage. No wonder he had been discarded by the Banpinera clan. It wasn't surprising, they were cold, heartless people. For now, he told himself to calm down and examine things carefully. Looking again at the screen, he noted at least one advantage. Despite the penalties, his strength, agility, endurance, and perception all remain maxed at 100. Still, without proper training or nutrition, even those stats would be wasted on a frail, underfed body. But then there were the traits, so many, and all S rank. He recognized some, like poison immunity and immortal duelist, traits earned only through gameplay. If it weren't for the 0 mana, this character would be completely overpowered. His eyes fell on one in particular, Archmage's Blessings. This one, he thought, wasn't just for show. Sitting up, he resolved to learn the rest in due time. There had to be a way to fix the mana issue. Just then, a harsh voice rang out across the prison. Numbers were being called, one after another, and prisoners shuffled out in chains. The boy sighed heavily, muttering that they were leaving again. Zed, Jinho, asked what was going on. The boy explained that those were death row inmates being taken for their final meal. Before execution, they were allowed to eat whatever they wanted. A sly smile crossed Zed's face. This was it. He asked the boy for his name. The boy chuckled, realizing he had only ever referred to Jinho by his number. With a grin, he introduced himself as Rio, a child of the streets with no clan. He asked Jinho for his own name. Jinho smiled back. I am Zed Arahan. Disclaimer, from here on, Jinho will be referred to as Zed Arahan for clarity. Zed then asked Rio if he wanted to escape. Surprised, Rio said he had no intention of staying here long. He had his own reasons for leaving. Zed pressed further, asking if he had a plan. Rio shrugged, explaining the only exit was through the front gate. Locked by the warden himself, Zed raised a brow. So the only way was to defeat the warden and take the key. Rio panicked at the thought. The director Clark was a retired but formidable five-circle knight. Worse, he was infamous for his hatred of magicians. In the Last Savior universe, knights and magicians were sworn enemies. Zed thought carefully. A five-circle knight, retired or not, would be a terrifying opponent. Could he even defeat him in his current state? But aloud he suggested another way. Rio grinned knowingly and said they could just steal from him. Zed was intrigued. Steal? Rio explained that street kids like him learned to pick pockets before manners. The problem was the warden was always surrounded by watchful eyes. Opportunities were rare. Zed smirked. So that's how it was. He was beginning to form an idea. The next day, the prisoners were lined up. A guard shouted that under the warden's orders, workloads would be ramped up even further, and everyone was to run instead of walk. Frustrated, the prisoners protested, demanding moderation. But the guards snarled back, asking if they were rebelling against the warden. One prisoner muttered in irritation, but before he could finish, a blade was at his throat. The guard coldly reminded him that these were the warden's direct orders, and if he had a problem, he could take it up with the warden himself. Nervous, the prisoner raised his hands in surrender, asking what reason there even was for such cruelty. The guard cast a glance at Zed and sneered. Didn't they know yet whose fault this was? The prisoners turned, glaring angrily at Zed. The guard coughed and slipped away, muttering about needing a smoke. Rio panicked, whispering nervously that the mood was dangerous, but Zed cut him off, telling him to stay away. Inside, Zed's expression hardened. That bastard Clark. He was deliberately inciting a riot. Too cowardly to do it himself, he was turning the prisoners against him. So much for the honor of a knight. Rio backed away, running nervously. He thought to himself that this time even the wardens were involved. He couldn't let Zed die like this. Meanwhile, the prisoners grouped together, declaring that Zed had to die or they were all doomed. Zed smirked, telling them he understood. But he couldn't exactly let himself die, could he? The mob lunged, shouting for his death. But Zed sprang forward first, driving his knee into one man's jaw and knocking him out instantly. He declared that he couldn't just roll over, he needed this fight to vent his rage. The prisoners encircled him, charging together. Zed smirked again, telling them this was exactly what he wanted. Fists, kicks and blades came at him from all directions. Zed weaved through them, countering with precise jabs, punishing kicks and devastating knees. As he fought, his thoughts burned. This was what he had once wished for in the octagon. Not one opponent at a time, but dozens, all charging together. This was true exhilaration. Laughing, he shouted for them to come harder, to fight more aggressively. Dodging a strike, he revelled in the thrill of danger, smirking darkly. This rush, this addiction to battle, was why he had embraced martial arts in the first place. He pummeled them mercilessly, demanding more and more as his frenzy grew. His eyes widened with a manic light, lost in the madness of the fight. From a distance, Rio watched in awe, gasping in disbelief at the sight of Zed crushing the mob. But then, prisoner 589, the gang leader, appeared behind Rio, calling him over. With him was prisoner 245, who sneered and declared that it would be better if Zed stopped rampaging and simply died. After all, friends were precious, weren't they? Rio's throat was seized, his neck about to be snapped. He gasped softly, calling out Zed's name. Zed froze, then his lips curled into a smile. His voice turned cold as steel. Those bastards had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Prisoner 245 grinned wickedly, tightening his grip on the knife. With a sneer, he mocked that all Zed had was his mouth, saying it should be considered an honor that someone of his caliber was even paying attention to him. After all, he was a two-circle knight. His voice rose as he roared, calling Zed a pathetic Arahan with no manner, someone destined only for doom. With that, he leapt into the air, lunging straight at Zed, but Zed effortlessly sidestepped, vanishing from 245's sight. The next moment, he appeared near Rio, already having neutralized prisoner 589 and calmly conversing with him. Shocked, 245 shouted in disbelief, demanding to know how Zed had managed such a feat without the use of magic. Zed smirked, replying that it wasn't magic, it was... Yet before completing his sentence, he shifted into stance. With fluid elegance, he spun gracefully and delivered a devastating kick directly to 245's neck. The prisoner was hurled across the ground, sliding and crashing from the sheer impact. As Zed glanced sideways, the doors burst open. Director Clark entered with his guards in tow. Clark's sharp voice rang out, ordering Zed, prisoner 218, to explain himself. Before Zed could respond, Rio stepped forward, pleading on his behalf. He revealed that 218 had been the victim, even taken hostage in the attempt on his life. Everything had been pure self-defense. Clark surveyed the scene, seeing the prisoners utterly beaten. Narrowing his eyes, he asked Zed a single pointed question. Had he unleashed his mana? Zed, expression calm and indifferent, replied ambiguously, "I wonder." At that, Clark released his aura. A suffocating purple energy surged outward, pressing down on everyone. The sheer weight of it forced the prisoners to their knees, gasping and muttering about how they couldn't breathe. Yet Zed stood unaffected, the energy swirling harmlessly around him like a barrier. Rio, on the ground and struggling for air, stared in disbelief. Could Zed really withstand the aura of a five-circle knight? No ordinary person should be capable of such a thing. Meanwhile, Zed himself was puzzled. A glowing screen suddenly appeared before his eyes. Trait: Champion's noble soul resists suppression. He raised an eyebrow. This was a trait he had never encountered before. Resistance? His lips curled into a smirk as he realized. Could this be a form of mental immunity? If so, it was an outrageous ability. After all, he had once reached the pinnacle of his world. Standing firmly under Clark's oppressive aura, Zed thought coldly that there was no way a half-baked five-circle amateur could hold him down. He saw right through the game being played. Clark, shocked, could only mutter in disbelief. How could Zed still be standing, especially without even unlocking his mana? Gritting his teeth, Clark intensified his aura further. The ground cracked beneath the pressure, violent energy shaking the hall. But Zed remained motionless, smiling faintly, entirely unaffected. As everyone around them gasped for breath, barely holding on, Zed thought to himself with satisfaction. An S-rank trait, no less. What would Clark do about it now? Clark's jaw dropped, unable to process what he was seeing. Even his guards pleaded for him to stop, unable to endure the crushing weight. With an annoyed click of his tongue, Clark finally withdrew his aura. Inwardly, he admitted that had this continued, his own anger might have driven him to draw his sword. Ordering everyone back to work, Clark turned to leave. But Zed's voice cut through the silence. He declared that he had something to say. Clark paused, demanding to know what it was. Facing him directly, Zed declared that he was done stacking stone towers, tired of constantly fearing prisoner attacks. He planned to put an end to it all. He would become a death row inmate. Rio gasped in shock, demanding what he was saying. But Zed only smirked, doubling down on his claim. Clark's eyes narrowed. Did Zed truly understand what that meant? He warned that if this was a mere whim, he would not forgive it. Zed sneered, accusing him of being worried about backtracking, and demanded the decision be recorded on a crystal ball. Clark grinned at that. Indeed, there was no better proof. He ordered the warden to fetch the crystal ball immediately. Zed in turn smirked and declared his final meal. He wanted Verity beef, a huge portion of it, enough to eat to his fill. The guards gasped in disbelief. Verity beef? That was an extravagant demand. It was the highest quality beef, raised only on the Verity Prairie in the Southern Empire, legendary even in the Last Savior game. It was said to be so delicious that it could restore lost strength, even turn the tide of battle. With a sly grin, he stated that considering the cost of his life, it was only fair. And since he only dealt in S-rank items, he warned them not to try any tricks. Rio, stunned, questioned Zed's sanity, but Zed casually added that Rio would be joining him as well. Enough portions should be prepared. For two. Clark gave the order, and the guards confirmed. Later, within his cell, Zed trained relentlessly while waiting for the rare beef to be procured. It would take a week, but during that time he remained focused, served by the wardens, never halting his push-ups or exercises. Rio, watching with exasperation, sighed that they were on the brink of death, yet Zed still insisted on working out. Zed's thoughts, however, remained sharp. In Last Savior, a special system ensured that whenever one of his stats increased, the excess experience flowed into others. And with all his stats already maxed except mana, every bit of growth here would channel into that one attribute. When the guards finally summoned them, Zed smirked knowingly. Rio, in despair, clutched his head, wondering if this was truly the end. Before them was laid a banquet of meat. Tears filled Rio's eyes as he devoured the feast, claiming he had never eaten anything so delicious. Zed chuckled, reminding him it was all thanks to him. Notifications flashed before Zed's eyes, penalties partially eased. He felt the flood of experience rushing in, his body brimming with newfound strength. The first objective was complete. Now, the next awaited. Meanwhile, in his office, Clark brooded over what had happened that day. He couldn't forget how Zed had shrugged off his aura, something impossible even for a young magician without mana. Staring at a bracelet in his hand, he vowed to uncover the truth and to repay the humiliations several times over. Back in the hall, Zed clenched his fist, reveling in the surge of power coursing through him. He couldn't wait to test it. Clark arrived, addressing Zed directly by his true name, Zed Arahan. Zed quipped that he must be sulking over not having a share of the feast. Clark, however, placed a hand on his shoulder, his thoughts dark. This arrogant Arahan, relying only on his pedigree, Clark would make certain his wretched face was twisted in agony. Zed smirked back unfazed. Clark thought to himself that Arahan came from the most elite magical family, and even the tiniest piece of intel about them could bring massive profit. Depending on the quality of that information, one could even live out their life in seclusion. Just then, Clark's bracelet began to glow, releasing waves of magical energy. Zed's eyes narrowed as he recognized it. He thought it was a magic tool. Suddenly, a violent burst of purple energy erupted from Clark's body. Laughing hysterically, Clark taunted Zed, declaring that even he wouldn't be spared. But Zed only smirked, completely unfazed by the display. The violent surge of energy intensified. Rio collapsed under the crushing pressure, clutching at Clark's rope. Irritated, Clark pushed Rio away in anger and shouted at him furiously. Zed sneered, mocking Clark and telling him to behave himself. That only pushed Clark further into rage. He stretched out both arms towards Zed, releasing an immense surge of energy. Yet Zed remained calm. Clark then exerted himself to his very limits, pouring out everything he had. Zed sighed, unimpressed. With ease, he brushed Clark aside and remarked coldly that if Clark wanted someone executed, he should do it properly instead of whining like a child. Clark was left utterly stunned. Sweat rolled down his face as his thoughts raced. He had even used his magic tool, yet it was useless. That meant Zed's mana was at least one circle higher. Could it be that he was a six-circle magician? No, it couldn't be possible. Unless this was the power of the Arahan bloodline. A five-circle was the product of a lifetime's effort, and yet even Clark's full might couldn't force Zed to bend. Clark's gaze fell on his bracelet, his mind blank with shock and disbelief. Zed looked at him and asked calmly if he was done with all his futile effort. Clark exhaled in defeat. Turning around, he declared that the execution would be carried out the very next morning. Even the great Arahan couldn't go against the law decreed by the Imperial Majesty. He told Zed to enjoy his final night. Inside the warden's office, Clark scribbled something into a book. His thoughts lingered on the events, noting that, though he hadn't yet figured it all out, the record might be valuable in the days ahead. Exhausted from pushing his mana to its limits and using his magic tool, he still forced himself to complete the report before resting. Meanwhile, inside the cell, moonlight streamed in through the window. The light fell on Rio's face, making him stir awake, eyes tightening against its brightness. Zed stood by his side and asked if he had woken up, concerned about his condition. Rio groaned, saying he felt nauseous and close to vomiting. But Zed, smiling faintly, complimented him on having quite a knack with his hands. Rio chuckled proudly, sliding a chain of keys and asking what Zed thought of his skill. Zed smiled back, telling him he did well. Inwardly, he admitted that for a normal person such a feat would have been dangerous, yet Rio proved surprisingly resilient. Rio explained that his trick had worked only because Clark was focused on Zed. He then asked if Zed was really fine. Zed replied calmly that he was perfectly all right. Suspicious, Rio remarked that something about this felt strange, as if there was more he didn't know. Zed brushed it off with a joke, telling him to just lift more stones. Then, opening his status bar, Zed noticed that his strength, agility, and endurance had each risen by 10 points. It was exactly as promised, nutritious and rewarding. While his consistent training had helped, this result was still extraordinary. He focused inwardly, feeling how satisfying his body had become. Though he wished he could shed the penalties sooner, he knew that was unlikely. Afterwards, Zed sat on the bed and told Rio they needed to head out that night. Once Rio recovered enough, they would escape. Rio hesitated, saying that the warden would notice any moment, but Zed, smirking, assured him not to worry. The warden would already be passed out by now. Rio was shocked, asking how he could be so sure. Zed knew the answer. That bracelet Clark wore was a coveted magic tool, one he couldn't even recall by name. It instantly amplified mana, but left behind immense fatigue. By now, Clark would be unconscious somewhere. Considering how Clark had shown up with the key and even used that tool, Zed thought to himself that his plan had become much easier. Later, when both were ready, Zed urged Rio to head out with him. If Rio was afraid, so be it. Rio checked on him again, asking if he was really all right, then joked that since Zed was his sidekick, he had no choice but to stick with him. But then, Rio frowned, realizing there was no room key to open the cell. Zed simply told him to step aside. With a single powerful kick, he shattered the door apart. Rio was stunned at the display, asking if Zed was really a magician. The noise alerted the guards. They shouted at Zed, demanding to know what he was doing. Zed confidently declared that it was an escape. The guards roared in anger as Zed and Rio bolted out, ordering one another to capture them. Rio, struggling to keep pace, warned Zed that the main gate ahead was blocked. Indeed, several guards stood in formation before the gate. Swords drawn, they charged forward regardless. The guards shouted to hold them off at all costs, and their comrades answered in unison. Zed yelled at Rio to keep running and not stop. Rio, sweating heavily and nearly out of breath, still pushed forward, responding that he understood. One of the guards swung his sword at Zed, but Zed sidestepped effortlessly. He then grabbed the guard by the face and hurled him aside, the man crashing into others. Another guard lunged, but before he could act, Zed struck him in the throat. The guard convulsed, choking and unable to breathe. Zed dashed past, scattering guards with his overwhelming speed and power. More attacks came, but he dodged them fluidly. One kick smashed into a guard's head, sending him sprawling. Another was struck down with similar force. The guards kept charging, yet Zed grinned, muttering in annoyance before striking them down one after another. From the side, Rio could only watch in disbelief, murmuring that it was insane. Soon after, Clark arrived at the gate, furious at the chaos. Guards lay unconscious across the ground. Hearing that number 218 had escaped, his rage boiled over. He roared at his men to catch them immediately. Meanwhile, in Matama village near the detention center, Zed and Rio hid inside a barrel in a quiet alley. Emerging, Rio told Zed that Clark had likely lost track of them. Zed asked where they were, and Rio explained that it was Mota, the only village nearby. Zed noted that the guards would naturally come here first. But Rio reasoned that they couldn't help it. The other towns were too far. If they blended in with the locals, they'd be safe. Zed accepted, asking what Rio's plan was. Rio pulled out a rugged old shirt, telling him to put it on. Zed scoffed, saying it looked like the trash a beggar would wear. Rio countered that the village was full of beggars, so disguising as one was their safest bet. After changing, Rio told Zed he'd fetch some necessities and that Zed should wait quietly. Zed questioned how Rio planned to get supplies without money. Rio smirked, asking why money would be necessary. Watching him leave, Zed thought that Rio's way of thinking was truly unusual. Rio returned soon after with coloured lenses. Zed tried on the blue pair, asking if it was enough. Rio explained that it was acceptable. Red eyes marked Arahan's lineage, so disguising them was crucial. In the southern regions under the Bahal clan, blue lenses were fashionable among nobles. Eye colour was treated like a fashion accessory. Zed recognized the Bahal clan immediately. His former character in the game had been Torres Bahal. Arahan for mages, Bahal for swordsmen, two rival houses that despised each other. Even their eye colours were opposites. Rio then told Zed he had found a good resting place nearby and led him there. In the woods they came across a stable. Both lay down on the hay to sleep. As Zed rested, he thought about his bizarre circumstances. Opening his eyes in this world felt like waking up inside a game, and now he was forced to hide in filthy stables. Still, in a strange way, it was almost fun. He looked over at Rio, wondering why the boy stuck so closely to him despite the danger. Rio was just a street kid, a pickpocket. Zed needed his help for now, but could he really keep trusting him? Morning came. Zed woke up, finally able to see the stable clearly. It was filthy, covered in dirt and dung. He questioned if he had really slept in such a place. Rio stretched awake, teasing Zed that perhaps being a noble made him uncomfortable in places like this. Zed retorted, asking if anyone could actually like such conditions. Rio explained that he hadn't chosen it out of love but necessity. Zed complained that he couldn't keep living like this. He needed to earn money. Rio asked how he planned to do that while avoiding the warden's eye, suggesting instead that Zed learn some pickpocketing. But Zed, resolute, told him to forget pickpocketing and instead find the place he mentioned. The scene shifted. In the underground arena, two fighters clashed brutally before a roaring crowd. Watching them, Zed smirked. The crowd roared, cheering wildly for the fighters. Watching the scene, Rio nervously remarked that Zed must have come to the wrong place. But Zed, smirking, replied that they were exactly where they should be.